I'm Dwight, and I'm joined by Maddox and our special guest, Michael Alves. You're in for another episode of For the Love of Creatives. Um, Michael, I am so glad that you could join us today.
I'm quite
Uh,
happy to be here.
it's really kind of special the way that we have known each other. We've known each other for years.
Mhm.
We met in our church community.
Mhm.
And I have always marveled at how you have been able to balance a whole host of talents. I mean, in
Well,
addition to being a musician, you're a maker, you are an educator, and most of all, you've always been someone that's easy with a smile, and you have such a big heart.
that's a nice thing to say, and I would turn that around on you. I would say you're a very welcoming person at church, and I'm thinking of a discussion we had about some pretty tense stuff where we skipped church. That was a nice introduction to. I hope it will be a lifelong friendship.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And and I'm also pleased to meet Maddox, who I don't know quite as well.
It's great to meet you too, Michael.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your
Mhm.
willingness to support and participate in this.
Okay.
Well, and I've teased just a little bit about some of your creative pursuits, but I
Okay.
think it would be really helpful if you could share in your own words a bit of your creative journey.
Well, I'm not a big astrologist, but I am a Gemini, so I kind of think of myself in two ways. I think of myself, outside of my family life. I think about my work as a musician. I've been playing electric bass since I was 13 years old. That's one of those connections that you could talk about. I had a teacher who I played cello growing up as a child from about the age of 10. And I had a teacher walk into a classroom one time and said he needed, this was in middle school, and told me that he wanted me to play bass in his jazz band. And I really thought, like, I have no idea what you just said, right? It was so foreign to me. And it's one of those times where I'm just glad I'm like, I said yes to it. And so I've been playing music for a long time, and I quite enjoy it a lot. I've had many roles. I went to college at University of North Texas, wound up getting a minor in music and a degree in English, and I played in the Irving Symphony Orchestra for 16 years, which kind of sounds fancier than it really is. But it was a lot of fun, and I made a lot of connections with people, met lots of classical music players through that, and that's really been a benefit to me in a number of ways. I started playing in rock bands probably in high school. I've always kind of been in or out of a rock band. Right now, I'm kind of more out than in, but I'm working on a couple of projects. So there's the kind of music side of me. I've been lucky enough to play gigs in almost every uh, venue in Dallas, with the exception of the new Longhorn Ballroom, which I think is great. And I hope to get a gig there. And I still haven't played the Kessler either. And then so I realized soon in college that I wanted to eat, right? So I started pursuing something to kind of have a day job. So I started teaching English, and I've taught high school for 30 years now. And another one of those weird things. One time, the principal at a school where I was teaching called me into her office and said, "We need you to teach this engineering course." And I was like, I didn't even know we had an engineering course at the school, right? So, and it was an elective class, and she told me a little bit about what it was, and it was kind of like the teacher who asked me to play electric bass and jazz band. I had no idea then. I just said, yeah. Well, my first question was, because I was an English teacher, at any time in this class, am I going home with like 100 essays to read? And she said no, and I said, I'll take it. I'll just take it, whatever it is. I'll figure it out later. And through that, I learned how to do CAD. I learned about 3D printing, and I'd already been kind of a maker. Subscribed to Make Magazine, which I think is a great way to get ideas. And so that just kind of took what was a hobby into like now that's what I do. Like that's what I do at the current school I teach. So I was really lucky in that respect. And then just I'm right now I'm working with some of my cousins. I have my great grandparents were missionaries in Turkey, and they were witness to the Armenian genocide. So that's a long story there. However, I have copies of my great grandmother's memoirs that she wrote during the time. We're digitizing them. We have interest at the Center for Armenian Studies, which is out of the University of Michigan. So they may want to help us publish this. So it's almost like that English degree is now like proving its worth, I think. So but I'm using AI because the copies are very poor. The scans that we have, it's a long story on that, but I'm using AI to correct a lot of the grammar, because when the scans go into the computer, they're all just a bunch of garbled, words, and the AI will just clean it right up. And so that's kind of like I'm very lucky that these are my pursuits. I can't say that enough, right? That we live in a time in the age of information, and everybody kind of, I think with the election and everything are concerned about AI and social media, but I also feel like they can be forces for change and within yourself. So does that answer that question about what
Oh,
I do?
absolutely.
All right.
Yeah. What a journey. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
a lot of highs and lows and some unexpected twists and turns.
Yeah. I'm kind of glad to be able to honor my great grandparents' work for human rights, basically. And
Yeah.
that was a very difficult time. And there's some passages in the memoirs that are very hairy. So I'm glad, and I'm also glad because there are people that deny that this has ever happened, and we're kind of living in this world where, what the strangest fiction now becomes fact, and I'm just like, nope, I've got pictures, I've got letters, I've got, so that's where we are.
Yeah. That's really amazing that you could have a hand in bringing the experiences of your ancestors to light, especially in this time when there is a lot of craziness, a lot of
Yeah.
misinformation. Wow. But with all of the things that you've done, I can see that you've gotten a chance to play in a whole
Yes.
lot of different areas. I mean, the things that you've done with music would be, you know, there are a lot of aspiring artists that would love to have a chance to uh, just have a moment to grace some of the stages that you've been on.
Yeah, I feel very lucky that I've got, I had a really big gig a couple of years ago at the Granada, which is a, really nice stage.
Mhm.
And that was a bucket list venue for me. And that was really through, um, another band that a band, I was I put together a band called Oliver's Army, which I'm a really big Elvis Costello fan, and I just decided one day that I was 30 years old and I never played any of his music live. So
Mhm.
I wanted to rectify that by putting a band together. And I thought to myself, okay, that's gonna only last like 2 gigs out of, we'll put a list together, 20 songs, and we'll play 2 gigs, and then I could say that part is done. But it wound up lasting 15 years. So through that, we met a lot of bands, and Elvis Costello is kind of a well-respected musician, I think. You know,
Mhm.
um, and so we'd have like all these bands say, "Oh, like we should do something together. We should do something." And I would call and follow up, and nothing would ever really happen, except for this one band called Campus Radio, and really bunch of talented musicians were they just we just became friends, kind of like social media friends, talking to one another, going to each other's gigs. And through them, two of the guys in my band actually subbed. They had a huge gig, but two of their guys were going to be out of town. And I was kind of jealous, right? I was like, man, I want to play that gig. right? But they already had a bass player, and he wasn't going out of town, and he's actually a really nice guy. And so I kind of got a little bit bitter about it, really, and then you know, chilled out a little bit. And so much later, they called me for the gig that I played at the Granada, and another gig. And so, and then we're going to be playing, the Oliver's Army Band is getting back together, and we're going to play the same venue with them, right? Hopefully in March. So I'm just saying, I could have just been bitter and jealous and, not seen them as allies, I guess, right? So I really, your themes are community for creatives. Just because they're out there working the same venues and jobs that my band was, and probably getting some of the better gigs from us, that doesn't mean they need to be like, we're not against them. We should be with them, right? And so, and all those guys are just so nice too. And they're just, every time they play, it's just they're they do, the campus radio band does like stuff from the 80s and 90s, and it's just like so spot on good, that I really need to see that as something to aspire to rather than to feel bad about. So that's kind of one of the things.
Well, that's
Michael, I'm seeing a theme emerge that I'd like to ask about.
Okay, shoot, yeah.
Because I think that it's played, what I'm seeing has played a really big role in your creative life. You mentioned several things now where you were presented with opportunities that were like foreign and completely out of your wheelhouse. And you took advantage of those opportunities, and I'm looking at what that has led you to, all that has brought about in your life, because you said yes to something that 99% of the world would have said no to, because they would have thought, I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
Speak to that for a minute.
I have to give you the best example of that. I really haven't given you that. And I can tell you my thought process. When I was in high school, I was at a very, what would we call like an under-resourced school in Austin, LBJ High School. I don't mean to paint it any differently. It was under-resourced because it was also under-enrolled. We didn't, there were classrooms in this high school that were just empty. And my orchestra teacher, who I dearly love, we're still friends to this day. She was also my orchestra teacher in middle school. We had like 8 people in the whole orchestra, right? The whole string section was like 8 people, 2 cellists, a bass, and violins and violas. Well, the girl who played bass dropped out of school, which is, I guess I should laugh about that, right? But she dropped out of school, and so my orchestra director came to me. Her name's Susan Williams. She came to me and said, "Well, you're already playing electric bass. You're gonna have to be the guy that plays, upright bass, the big, huge upright bass." Which there's really no similarity between those two instruments other than both have the name bass, right? The big upright bass has it's an unwieldy instrument to learn. It's got a long learning curve, different fingering. It sounds an octave below. Anyway, so I was really mad about that, right? Because I thought I was doing well on the cello, and now I was going to have to switch to bass just because somebody else made a choice. But years later, because she made me do that, I went to North Texas and played classical bass, and then I got into the urban symphony. So immediately when I got hired, I called. I was like, "Well, I guess you were right?" Because now I'm making $2 to $3 grand a year playing this instrument, But yeah, I don't know. I hope that the one thing I would tell people is, when you're presented an opportunity to do something outside your wheelhouse, we have the internet now, right? Right. You have support systems built into you, probably carrying the device that could tell you immediately some things about how to do it. I often tell my students, it's like, how did we learn anything before YouTube, right? Because there's a YouTube tutorial for everything now. It might not be the best one, right? But it is a go-to resource. So, but once again, YouTube's not going to tell you how to be a nice person, right? It's not, I mean, like I probably was, well, I was 15 when I was told that I had to play the upright bass. I probably didn't take that message that well, right? But and hopefully I've matured since then. But you know, the vast majority of the things that I enjoy doing with other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to be an approachable person, right? You have to say, I will try to do this, right? I got a call from those campus radio guys. They asked me to substitute play bass in they have an Oasis band, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big Oasis fan. I know 4 of their songs, and I was gonna have to play for an hour and a half, right? So I mean, you know, the parts aren't hard, but they're unfamiliar. So, and we had a short ramp up time. And so I just said, hey, I can do this, but I got to have an iPad. So, you know, I can read the actual notes that I'm supposed to be playing with you guys. And if you think that's going to detract, I understand it, but I'm not going to, you know, it's not going to work unless I have that. So you have to kind of ask for what you need as a follow up, right? Like, this is the support that I need from you to do what we're going to try to do well together, right? Like, you know, like the conversations pre this podcast that we had, you know, I needed things, you needed things, you know, we want to everybody here on this here wants to do a good job. So you kind of got to look at it that way.
A band is a small community.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you're just talking about some form of community. I think that we fail to realize sometimes that we're in so many communities in any given day that we don't even realize it. You know, your family's a community, your coworkers and your workplace is a community, and if you go to church, that's a community, and we're involved in many communities without really thinking it. I kind of like we take it for granted, I think.
Yeah, and I think one thing the pandemic laid bare is that when we lost the connections between people, right, among people, that was really hard to deal with. And I think personally that kind of killed a lot of creative endeavors, unfortunately, right? But
I think we're still struggling to get that back. I don't think we fully recovered from that.
And I see it in the girls that I teach at Ursuline, right? They just don't know. I mean, I'm not mad at them, right? We did the best that we could do in the situation we had, but they just don't know how to trust one another to the full extent that they can co-collaborate, you know, and I'm trying to feed that back into what I do because I think that's more important than my subject matter, right? It's like, you're going to go to college, you're going to start a life, you got to learn that you know, people are a good resource for what you need to do, right? So, and I mean, I think every educator is also feeling like that, right? We got to put these things back because of the situation that happened, and you know, it's just it's a problem that we have to face. But I mean, I see it getting better over time. But man, that first year back when, you know, it was really tough.
Yeah, it's an uphill
in a
climb.
room full of aliens.
Yeah, it was interesting, but I'm kind of glad. I mean, there's trauma bonding among teachers for that, but you know, I don't want to do it here on this podcast. But like you said, it is a community, right? And you know, I think about my wife started quilting. She does what's called modern quilting. Have you ever heard of the modern quilt movement? It's similar to like what the quilt is in our sanctuary, rather than you know, if you think your stereotypical quilt is like a geometric pattern repeated and set of squares, that's not what modern quilting is. And so she attends a modern quilt guild that's here in Dallas, right? Just so she can get ideas, meet people, learn techniques. And I just think, what a wonderful thing, you know, what a wonderful thing that people dedicated to making the world a beautiful place, and in such a practical way, like a quilt, you know. I just think, and now we have this kind of new aesthetic that she enjoys, so it's really nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting the way that you called out how it took a certain amount of maturity for you to deal with that. Well, with rather unpleasant news at the age of 15. And you carried that lesson forward where you were given similar challenges that you had to rise up to. And, a lot of people miss out on those opportunities because of whatever stories they tell themselves.
Well, and I also think, and I'm not telling you this, the misjudgments I made, right? Right. There are quite a few. But yeah, it's a hard thing though. Ego does, like it as an artist, as a creator, as anybody who has a persona, ego does get in the way, right? And sometimes ego, like I've been in bands with people that have strong egos, but they're leadership egos, right? They're somebody I can back up. It's like you're all in. I might not like your style, but you're all in. And you might be the leader of this band, and so this is your music and what you're writing, and this is, I'll try to make a part of it, right? So I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but sometimes you have to like check your ego at the door as well, too. And a lot of that has to do with recording, which I haven't done a lot of recording music, right? When you make something permanent, it takes on a whole nother level, right? So, I don't like to go into studio situations unprepared. So sometimes when I'm asked to do that, like, hey, I wrote this song, I need a bass part. And I'm like, okay, right. But I need to get this full on. I need to know what the chords are. I need to know what the lyrics are. I need to know what the drum part's going to sound like. And if you can't provide that, then you're not going to get the best work out of it, right? So I don't know if did that answer your question about that? I feel like I'm straight a little bit here.
No, it's a beautiful insight. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful insight. And when we really wanted to make sure that we covered the large field of creativity, or the
Yes.
many different areas that you dabble in. And it strikes me that through our conversation throughout this podcast, we failed to mention that you are also a podcaster.
Well, I didn't know if you wanted to promote my own podcast, but since you're asking, it's called Applesauced. Applesauced, which is apple sauced, like the past tense of sauce, as if it were a verb. Yes, well, thank you for saying that. That was a situation, much like Maddox mentioned, that my friend James just came to me one day and he said, I want to start a podcast. This is right before the pandemic. And I was like, you want to do what? Why? For what purpose? And he said, well, I just feel like, and this is what I really, really like this insight. It's like, everybody we know, and I'm not saying I know geniuses but everybody has a fascinating story. And, really normal, everyday people, to me, are completely fascinating. I mean, and through this podcast, I've interviewed Reverend Cantor like 3 times on there, which I'm really surprised he would do it, but it was great to have him on. Through some connections, I interviewed David Zucker, who made the airplane and Police Academy movie, not Police Academy. What's the other one? Oh my, I'm gonna mess that up. All right, sorry. I interviewed 2 Hollywood directors who are working, and so that was great. The reason it's called Applesauce is because we're going to start it out as a technology podcast, which we realized was really boring. Right. And so, I mean, there are technology podcasts out there that do the work there. And so we quickly shifted to just our 3 themes, which are life, technology, and beer. That was a James idea that we drink and rate beers during the podcast, which sometimes I'm like, oh man, this is kind of weird, but we do it that way, and so it's a lot of fun. I don't know if we're getting a large audience. I don't really think it matters to us that much more, but to have a dialogue on a certain topic with people with different perspectives gets you back to that community, right? I just remember we interviewed this beekeeper from down the street, and he brought us mead that he had made, and I don't know. I had a bad experience with mead. I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. It just tasted horrible. It was at a Renaissance festival. I don't know what they were. It just tasted like yeasty honey, but this mead was like, well, it was almost like a cider. Anyway, that was really exciting that he dropped, and this is during the pandemic, so any dropped off mead on my doorstep, and then we drank mead and talked about beekeeping. Beekeeping is something, I do have a lot of hobbies. I thought, oh, I could probably do that, but now I've like looked into it and it's like, nope, little too complicated for one, but he was so fascinating about just the beauty of bees and how they construct, how they give us this great product and live their own lives. Anyway, I just like that's a good example of having a dialogue with somebody who's outside of your kind of peer group, I guess, and then just taking away some of the beauty of the world, I think.
Well, and what a great experience for you to have with that. It forces you to get in front of people that you normally wouldn't see. And I mean, as you described, working Hollywood directors, a beekeeper, a fascinating mix. And I think you're able to draw from having those experiences and weave them into your everyday. Like, I mean, when you're in front of the girls at the school, you probably are able to hold their attention far better than someone that's just watching Netflix every night.
Well, I would like to think so. I have my good days and my bad days. I can give you a concrete example of something, though. One of the courses I teach is a survey course called AP Computer Science Principles, which is a survey of computer science issues as well as coding. And so one of the things that the College Board thinks these girls need to learn about is licensing, right? Like Creative Commons licensing, which Creative Commons licensing is a really powerful tool for creators. And if you don't know what that is, you should probably look into it. It's basically a way of protecting your designs, and it's for free. And I don't know what kind of legal bite it has, but at least you can say like I have, this is the creative licensing for this. I actually just made one for my new apartment. So I made this little rack. I don't know. I mean, it's probably not the most impressive thing. It's a rack to hold Atari 2600 cartridges. Are you familiar with them? All right. Because I have 150 of these cartridges and I need a way to store them. Yeah, that's a whole separate thing. And so I was explaining, and it's on a website, I was explaining like I made this thing. It took a lot of work modeling it and printing it, and I want other people to be able to experience it, but I don't want to take it to like Etsy. I don't want people to like start selling on my Etsy my work, and they profit from it. So I was able to go into the different Creative Commons licensing was something that I had really done. But what was more fascinating to them than any of this baloney that I just talked about was the comments people had made about my designs, right? Because it was on a website where they were giving feedback, right? Like, oh, this works. Thank you so much. And I was like, they're like, these people love this. And I was like, well, that's 5 people, but still, it was like, you've impressed somebody that's unknown. And I think that kind of appeals to maybe their generation, right? How many likes did you get? How many comments or whatever? But it helped, deliver this rather kind of dry stuff about licensing that's in a way that they could relate to it, I think, a little bit better. So
yeah, that is some good stuff.
Michael, I'd like to shift gears for just a minute.
Okay, that's all right. We can shift gears.
You have this vast creative life, and it's all over the map. You have these great stories, and it sounds like you've had absolutely a lot of fun.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Okay.
I'm wondering, in all that, what has been the biggest challenge that you've had to overcome as a creative? The big kahuna.
Well, I think it's there are 2 voices that I try. Well, I'm going to say 3 now. 3 voices when I'm building something, right? For myself. Okay. So like I'm working on a project to be an example project for one of my classes. So that one kind of has its own timeline, right? The first thing is you have no timeline, right? You have no timeline, right? the second one is staying organized. And so I'm old school. Like I have this is my to-do summer 2024 book, right? And I dedicate just to keep my ideas together, right? And then the third voice I would say is that I'm, in my own opinion, messed up projects that I just kept putting. I should have just been finished with it. Like, okay, now we're finished. It's ready to go out into the world, like I did with that Creative Commons 3D model that I made. This is just a simple thing. I'm gonna stop, right? I'm gonna stop it at this point and just let it release it. And sometimes I've just gone on and on and on, and then it's like it's a mismatch of nothingness.
You know,
And
I've heard artists say that sometimes the hardest part of like a painting or a sculpture is to determine when it's actually finished.
yes, and then you always see the flaws. You always see the flaws. I can listen to recordings that I made 20 years ago and hear something that I either faked or it's quieting that voice in your head, the voice that says it's not enough, right? If you're working with somebody, and they accept your performance or your art, or they give you feedback positive, just say thanks, right? That's exactly what quieting that voice that I'm not good enough to do this. My greatest challenge, though, personally for me, is woodworking. I've tried to do woodworking. Wood to me is a very unforgiving medium, right? So I need to quiet that voice that says you're going to instantly be good at woodworking, right? Because I think we live in this age of immediacy, and I think that's another challenge as well.
That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Now, you described those challenges that you've overcome, and I think throughout we've heard about a number of successes, and maybe things that you wouldn't even frame as successes because you're just going about living your life. But what are some of your proudest moments?
They've been a lot. So you could start steering the ship away from this at any point.
Okay.
One of the proudest moments personally I've ever had is that in 2020 I was teaching at Vines High School, and that was the pandemic. And prior to the pandemic, I had 15 students on my robotics team, and we had done fairly well the season before that. The second season, it went down to five kids. And I went through the existential crisis of like how I'm going to have a team, just 5 kids. Long story short, mostly due to the delay in opening tournaments and things like that, we started building a robot in August, and then in June of the next year, it won state. Right, that team of 5 students won state, the state of Texas tournament that year, and so, and without getting too much in the woods, there was a need for those kids to have something to do, right? Because they had been taken off, and 5 was at least manageable pandemic wise in terms of my school rules. It's a fairly small pod, if you want to call it that. And luckily the restrictions kind of went down as the school year went on. But I could have said, like, look, I'm not going to deal with this after school. I'm not going to, this, I feel like I served them as well as I needed to, right? And so, and they just gave it back. There's this one kid, I'm gonna just give him a shout out. His name's Hammond Chander. We were going to the state tournament, and the first part of a robotics tournament is your robot drives autonomously, right? So it has to do a number of tasks all by itself without any driver control, which is that's the heart. And if you score an autonomous, you're almost guaranteed to win the match. And we had a pretty good autonomous program that we tweaked over and over and over. And I said, hey, Hemachander, we're going to this tournament. Our autonomous program is pretty good, but it's probably going to conflict with our partner autonomous because you get randomly, paired up at the beginning. It's like 2-on-2 basketball. And I was like, they're gonna have 100% autonomous programs. Why don't we just write these little bitty programs that just put extra points onto that? And I said, could you meet me up here on Saturday and we'll just write autonomous program? Well, that kid wrote 30 programs for that robot, right? We were there for 5 hours writing those programs. And that ultimately is what really made us desirable because as you progress in the tournament, other teams can pick you to be a partner. And that made us like really desirable, that we could add on to something that somebody else had already perfected. So that was a proud moment for me because there were just so many times that I wanted to like just throw in the towel just because of pandemic learning. And so I really feel like those 5 kids who put those efforts into that got from me what they deserved, right? They just like and I didn't give up, right? And I would have felt that way had we not even gone to the state, right? So that was just the icing on the cake that we got to go to San Antonio and compete and, be on top. So that's a proud moment. Like I said, playing at the Granada, I'm a big REM fan. Once again, played very few REM songs in my own band. And so to get to play, we played the whole 1987 Document record, start to finish. That wasn't my choice. Not every song on that's a winner. But so that was great. Just getting to learn all that. I met some fabulous musicians through that. There were a bunch of other players that kind of helped out. Well, maybe 3 other players that helped out that weren't regular members. This is outside my family, right? Of course, raising a daughter who's now in school in Boston, all those kind of things. Those have been proud moments in my life. But I don't know. I mean, it's really hard being married for 23 years, right? I mean, I don't know. That's an accomplishment, right? I kind of feel like in the 21st century, people have a lot of options of how they spend their time and who they spend it with. But, being married for 23 years is very nice. It's, a lot of my accomplishments have to do with my wife, Lynn, understanding who has also a need to create as well. Knowing how that helps your brain, right? And I'm very lucky to have found her, in my life. So, I did get fired from the Irving Symphony, so that's probably not one of the greatest accomplishments. But it was really a wake-up call because during the time I was playing with them, the University of North Texas brought in a world-renowned bass professor. And suddenly the whole Metroplex market was like flooded with the Michael Jordans of bass, right? Who are willing to work at the price that Irving Symphony was paying them. So it was kind of a reminder that yes, your skills are only as good as your skills are. And you can be in a situation like that, if you're not continuing to improve, which I wasn't on upright bass, I just had too many things going on, other people will be better than you, and that's a fact of life.
Well, that's a pretty hard lesson to learn.
I don't know if it's getting fired, maybe let go, or my contract wasn't renewed. I don't know.
Sure.
We can put any euphemism on that you want it.
Sure. No, that's really brilliant. It reminds me of how you alluded earlier to how when you're teaching, there's a lot of things that you're trying to impart that go beyond what is just in the curriculum.
Yes.
What do you think are the most valuable lessons that you're passing on to your students?
Well, I think, high school, and it's interesting, I'm teaching primarily sophomores, 10th graders, and for some reason, if you took the 30 years of high school that I've taught and made a graph of what grades I've taught, the sophomores would be like 5 times as big as any other grade level. And so for some reason, sophomores find me or I find them. And I think that year in high school, there's a reason why we have the adjective sophomoric, right? We don't have junioric or senioric. We have sophomoric. You're just about, you're waking up. It's really a bridge between adult and child, right? You're going kind of from late adolescence to, I mean, middle adolescence to late adolescence, and you're really becoming. There's that line in the song, Jack and Diane. It's like, hold on to 16 as long as you can, because changes come around real soon to make us women and men. Are you familiar with that line? That's in the bridge, one of the greatest bridges of any pop rock song from the 80s, as far as I'm concerned. And you know, I kind of live by that. It's like, you know, and I think the girls at Ursuline are very lucky because they get introduced. They have to take a STEM CS course. It's not an option. They have to do it. And I will, you know, it's not for everybody, but everybody should be exposed to it, right? I didn't become a historian, right? Even though I love history, but I love the history that I like to study, right? I didn't, you know, I couldn't really care less about the Sumerians, right? You know, but I do like history, right? So I'm, you know, well, the Sumerians did have a lot of technological, you know, things anyway. So my point is that, you know, the collaboration, the soft skills, that's really kind of what you're teaching in high school, as well as, you know, being mature, sticking to a timeline, being organized. And I do think, you know, I've taught enough to say, you know, I started teaching with a chalkboard, and now, you know, I have this, you know, really fancy. Ursuline's an all Microsoft school, so I have all this, you know, incredible Microsoft technology at my disposal. But with that, it's like a blessing and a curse. It's like the ease of it, and, you know, it can also create distraction. So I like to model, like I did with that lesson about the, you know, Creative Commons. I like to model. Like I'm, you know, I just gave my intro to robotics their last project, and they have to kind of come up with something on their own that lights up and spins around. And I gave them a lot of flexibility. And then I said, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. Like after they'd already decided what they were going to do, because you can't tell them what you want to do, because then they'll all try to do what you're doing. That's just the nature of being a child. And so I'm like, okay, here's what I'm doing. And they're like, that's so cool. You're going to do it too. I was like, yeah, we're in this together, right? You're going to see me fail. You're going to see me cut a piece of, like, I decided I'm going to have to use wood because that's a challenge for me, you know? So I think, and I was always, I loved like 7th grade shop class because I loved seeing my teacher make things, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to, you know, I'm just trying, and I found this nice, really video of this girl who makes stuff with this microcontroller we're using. And they're like, oh, that's so cool. And I'm like, well, you could do something like that. I mean, it's just pieces of cardboard and felt with some lights on it, you know, and we can, you know, and I think there's a voice that, I don't know if today's kids are hearing it like me. It's like, well, everything I create has to be insta ready, right? I'm like, no, right? It's gonna, you know, it's gonna be messy. There's gonna be sawdust on the floor. You're gonna draw something ugly and correct it later. So that's what I'm trying, especially with coding too, because coding is like 90% failure until you get to success. And you just have to have the resilience, you know, to understand what the errors are telling you and fix the problems.
That's beautiful. Well, in the interest of keeping to time, as you mentioned,
yes, yeah,
we're going to move to a segment that we call our rapid fire questions.
Okay, all right. I'll try to be short. All right.
Okay. So first question. What's your favorite part of the creative process?
Designing.
Okay.
Do you want me to elaborate, or just gonna...
Well, if there's more, we're interested to hear.
Designing, because that's where you get to dream big and without reality. And if you can do that, you're going to come up with something cool.
I love
And
that. No, that's cool.
Mhm.
Next question. How does community fuel your creativity?
Obviously collaboration. Music is a very collaborative art. And I really feel like just being able to, you know, talk, talk about music, talk about what you love about music, um, and then go try to make music that's similar or your own. That's really where it lives. And I'm lucky to have in a lot of my contacts people could say like, "Hey, do you want to try this?" And if they had the time, they'd probably say yes.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Last question. What motivates you to create?
I think it's a stress relief personally. I mean,
Mm.
it is a time to relax my mind, in a non-chemical way, I guess, right? So I think it is like I can tell when I haven't like I spent 4 hours in my office because I just moved, moving things around, but I did spend some time doing some design stuff just because I need that you know, relaxation. That when I was showing that design to the girls, they were like, "Well, you could make money off of this." And I said, "Well, then it becomes work, right? It becomes work, and I have to please somebody else. Somebody's paying me for my service instead of just accepting what I've created, right?" And so, that to me would not be relaxed.
I love it.
Yeah, that's a
But
pretty powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I'm lucky that I don't have to rely on that to feed myself, but yeah.
To create for just the sake of creation.
Yes. I mean, I want my stuff to please other people, but I don't care if it does.
yeah.
Or I have a Facebook album called Disturbing Pictures of Me Drawn by Students. Yeah. And so, which I take as almost one of the highest compliments, right? And like this one kid, this was before kind of like school violence was the thing, drew me in a Mortal Kombat situation. I don't know if you're familiar with the
Yes.
yes, right. And and sometimes I said on the Facebook folder, like sometimes these were presented to me willingly, and sometimes I just was found on the floor, so and I kind of like that art. I think, I just, I like you felt the need to create now. You do have to listen to what I'm trying to tell you for the work you're supposed to be doing, but you found this time to create, and I was the source of inspiration. Anyway, so.
I love that.
Mhm.
That last point that you hit on about how we need to create. I mean, that is what defines culture.
Mhm.
It is kind of what it is that sets humans apart from uh, the other animals. Once
Yes.
we have our needs taken care of, we can leave our mark and we can learn from each other in ways that aren't just the kinds of rote things that are passed down. They're not things that you find in books, but things that
Mhm.
make the spirit soar.
Well, and to follow up on that, I have a good friend Russell who's in my Oliver's Army band, and he's a good musician, good father, credible. He also is a history teacher, high school history teacher, who's taught a course called the Theory of Knowledge, and he
Mhm.
starts off the Theory of Knowledge class saying humans have been smart for a long time, right? You have to get it into your head, right? And so, you know, they developed, weapons of war, they developed art, right? And if it was just the first cave dweller putting their hand on the cave wall and then filling their mouth with a pigment and spraying it on there, that is the impetus of humanity, right? We're leaving our mark
Yeah.
in some way for the future to see. And I do hope we're living in a world that is more hospitable. But and when I get down about that, I'm like, well, what can I do now about it? Well, I can create something that somebody else might want to use. And now I have the ability to distribute it and give it to them for free. I'm not a songwriter, right? In fact, I've written one song in my whole life. And that's because the guys I was in a band, they were just pestering me to write a song. So I wrote a country song about the DART train. And each verse in it is a girl that like basically dumped me. So they were like, well, why did you put each girl in the song? I was like, because that's all I got, right? That's all I got for this, right? So most people spend their whole lives with their heartbreaks being like, I'm Taylor Swift. I mean, she's mined this for years, right? Putting their heartbreaks into all their creative work. And I was like, no, I'm just going to do it in a 4-minute country song. So anyway.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, this has been a blast. We have really enjoyed hanging out with you today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's been quite a pleasure.
You have quite the stories. It's just so much.
All right. Well, I hope it makes good listening for your listeners.
Absolutely.
All right.